From the kitchen of the cabin and around the world, this is Voices from the Solitude, a podcast about the coronavirus and gaming. Today I'm talking to Elizabeth Hargrave. We talk about how America is dealing with the crisis. So, I'm here with Elizabeth Hargrave. And so, first of all, I asked you this off air and you said, well, why don't we do it on tape, as this is why we're here. So how are you doing? How are you coping with the lockdown?
I'm okay.
That sounds convincing.
But I'm trying to give the thoughtful, not reflexive, I'm fine. None of us are great, right? But I'm I'm a notch above surviving it. And only surviving. I
mean, how different is it? I noticed a friend the other day put up a post saying, I'm really surprised at people's reaction to living their lives like I live my life normally. So how different is this for you in your sort of everyday work?
Well, that's a really interesting question, right? Because if you had asked me, even when this was all starting, when lockdown started, I would have said, this really doesn't change that much for me. Even before I went full-time on game design, I had been working from home for years. And, I'm pretty much an introvert, but I do hang out with my friends every weekend and sometimes during the week. I do play testing every Wednesday for, a good 5 or 6 hour block with some very dear friends of mine that we've been doing it for years. And that is probably the thing that I miss the most, just that anchor in my week that then becomes the organizing principle for working on the feedback out of playtesting and then scrambling to get ready for the next Wednesday. So even though I'm kind of a homebody and have been working from home for years, it still feels really different. And I think just the you're not allowed to do something makes it
right
that much more attractive to and missed. So I have friends that it wouldn't be unusual for me to go for 2 weeks without seeing them in person, but now it's oh my God, I can't see them in person.
And so the last time we spoke on tape, you were still doing your other gig. And so now you're 100% full-time game designer. How is that? How has that been, that transition from sort of normal life to this sort of bizarre profession that almost no one has?
I mean, it's less stuff to juggle. The real decision point for me was there was a contract that I had been doing for I don't even know, 13-ish years. Every summer I was doing this series of site visits where I would go out to different cities around the US and run a bunch of focus groups and meet with a bunch of doctors and talk about whatever hot topics my clients wanted me to research and get this sort of in the field perspective from people who are affected by their programs. And it turned out more and more over the last few years that doing a bunch of site visits in the summer is a really terrible project to have if you're trying to go to board game conventions as well. And then last year, when I had to go to Berlin for the Kennerspiel and come directly back, I didn't even go home. I went straight to go to a site visit that had been planned for months. I think that was my breaking point when I was I don't think I want to do this project again. So that when that came up for renewal in January, and I said no, that was okay, I guess I'm really doing this. I'm just a game designer now. So that's the biggest change, really, is just not having to juggle so much and fit things into my schedule that we're really starting to butt heads. And now, I don't have to fit any of it into my schedule because there are no conventions to go to. So,
and have you found that Have you found that the creative juices have flowed more since you decided, right, I'm now a game designer?
Not necessarily. I have more time, and more. Yeah, I don't know, but it's more that I sort of have the same amount of ideas and more time in my week to deal with them, and it's bumping less of my personal life, honestly, more than anything. That I was still doing sort of a similar amount, but of game design stuff, but now I have more time to do other things.
And sort of how are you filling your time? I was reading, the reason I got in contact with you for a chat is because I read your Twitter and you were talking about sort of having access to the outdoors even in this time. So how are you filling your time when you're not working then?
Yeah, we've been getting outside a lot. It's been a beautiful spring here. All the spring flowers are blooming, and my husband and I normally would be outside a lot at this time of year, and we kind of know a bunch of places that we can go where the trails aren't super crowded. There's like a little river path for a few blocks from our house that runs, through our suburban area that is totally packed all the time, and I just avoid it like crazy. But there are plenty of places to go that aren't, especially once you get like away from the few places that everyone knows. There's lots of places, like the Potomac River is this huge river that flows by Washington, D.C., and there are trails along most of it for on both sides for a lot of its length. And there's lots of places to go where you can hike along the river, and you'll see, people every 15 minutes or something, but that's fine, The morella mushrooms are starting to come up, so we've been mushroom hunting and foraging for wild greens in weedy places. And I haven't been grocery shopping in 3.5 weeks, and my friends were like, "What are you doing for vegetables? All of our vegetables are gone." And I'm like, "Yeah, we're just we're picking chickweed and garlic mustard."
And so, you're still in certain aspects of game design. I guess this is a great time. I was speaking to Tony Boydell the other day on the internet, and he turned the camera and he showed me like the 7 prototypes he's got at the moment. And this is giving him great time to do that initial work where you're not ready to show the game yet, but you're able to put mechanisms together and prototype and get the idea and like sort of put it in a box ready to take to people. But how are you playtesting? How are you doing all that stuff where you need other people to tell you that your game's not ready yet?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, honestly, the last few weeks I've been like very mentally shut down and not doing any design. Like I can't. But I have, there's a playtesting group in New York City that includes Gil Hovind, Daniel Newman, and a bunch of other folks, they normally meet twice a week in New York City, and they have moved all of that onto Tabletop Simulator, and they do like voice chat on the side while playing on Tabletop Simulator. So I actually joined them this weekend for their Saturday meeting and played a game and had lots of technical difficulties, but like at least got my feet wet. And I think that's like the main thing people are going to have to do is like these clunky online testing systems. The one thing I have been working on is for the next Wingspan expansion, we had sent it out for blind playtesting. And so I got back a bunch of written feedback from folks and have been sort of working through a punch list on that. So that's stuff that I don't necessarily need to test here. There's there's a couple things. Like I'll probably play through one game with my husband or something with some of the new stuff that came out of the blind playtesting, but most of it is fairly straightforward, and it's just computer work, and I'm just like updating, fixing things on cards or making some new stuff. So that's all doable. But the playing with other people is a real limitation. And being able to like sit there and manipulate things while you talk about what could be done differently and stuff, like that's all kind of doable on tabletop simulator, but it's not the same at all.
I played a prototype on Tabletopia the other day, and if you'd have recorded the session and used beeps to beep out the expletives, it would have been one constant tone. Because it's that thing where you have to pick up the things and drop them. Yeah, I just find it super unwieldy. Is that the same thing with Tabletop Simulator? I just find it absolutely no replacement at all.
Yeah, like I would pick up whole decks of cards on accident. Like it got to the point where someone else in the game was drawing my cards for me because I just couldn't figure out how to draw one card at a time. So I need to like find some little corner of Tabletop Simulator where I can just like go in some game that's set up by myself and practice drawing cards or something before I inflict myself on another playtest.
And so also I wanted to speak to you about, so firstly, can you tell us, because I guess in America, state by state, it's different. What's the situation with regards to what you're legally allowed to do in the DC area at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm technically in Maryland. I'm like a half mile from DC. But the rules in DC and Maryland are actually quite similar. So we're under a stay-at-home order, but it doesn't actually mean that you have to stay in your house because you're allowed to go out for exercise, and there's a pretty expansive definition of what qualifies for exercise. I know in some places in Europe, like you can only walk within your own neighborhood, but that is not the rule here. So we can pretty much go anywhere and go hiking, and you're just supposed to stay 6 feet away from people, 2 meters away from people when you're out. So that's not particularly difficult. And then really all the stores except for groceries and pharmacies are closed, but then things like construction and landscaping, to me it's very strange, but they have been deemed essential services, and like our big hardware stores are still open for business and apparently are like a crowded nightmare because everyone's doing all of their to-do list for their houses that they haven't gotten to in years. And so like that's very strange to me, that all of that is going. So like I have a friend that has a landscaping business that I assumed he was going to have to shut down the way people were talking about the orders, but that's still going. And you can still get takeout from restaurants because that's food. I don't. It's very patchworky, and it is different from state to state. I know some places have like completely closed down the parks. Here, the playgrounds are closed because you can't keep kids from touching the same stuff over and over in a playground. But they've actually closed some streets to make more places for people to walk, and I think people are taking real solace in that and getting outside a lot more than they normally would because it gets them out of the house.
So, also I was interested to talk to you because although this isn't your job anymore, you're a former worker in the health system. From your perspective, how do you think America is dealing with this current situation?
I think the states have really stepped up, and I think we lost some time because the states didn't realize that the federal government wasn't going to do anything because there are these major federal agencies in place that everyone thinks of as the leadership in a situation like this, and they just haven't done some of the things that people would expect them to do. Although I do think the CDC did start out doing contact tracing when the first cases became clear in the States, but they quickly became overwhelmed by the capacity to do that. And state health departments are also sort of responsible to do that. So there's a lot of confusion over who's supposed to do what, and there's also sort of politics at play in terms of like the party in power in the federal government right now doesn't believe that the federal government should do things in general. That's sort of their basic philosophy, and so they just haven't done things. And so it leaves you with a real patchwork where I think we will see some very clear sort of cases that will be studied in the future about how to handle pandemics, because we've got this real patchwork of how different states have responded. And I think you'll be able to see the results of some of that when people have time to really sift through the data. Like New York City knew that it was having a problem and chose not to close its schools for much longer than anyone thought that they should keep them open. And, well, I shouldn't say anyone. There were legitimate reasons that they didn't want to close the schools. They have a lot of kids that rely on the school system for 2 meals a day, and who are homeless, and like the school is the safest place for them to be all day. There's some enormous number of homeless kids in the New York City school system, and so they wanted to keep the schools open, but that, I think, in retrospect, will probably have turned out to have been a horrible, horrible decision, unfortunately, because we're seeing the cases in New York now.
And who do you think has performed well? Who do you think has performed poorly?
I mean, I've been really happy with the governor here in Maryland. He's been very proactive and sort of ahead of the curve in terms of closing down the schools, closing down businesses. And, again, it's so the same thing that played out on the federal level with the Republicans in charge sort of not believing in government intervention and wanting people to like do their own thing, and sort of the libertarian bent is playing out in some Western states. And yeah, we'll see how many people get sick because of it. If you look at maps of the United States, there are maps of like how much people have cut down on their travel, and how well is social distancing being observed. And partly that's policy level, and partly that's human behavior level, what the maps are measuring. But it looks almost exactly like an electoral map of the United States. It's fascinating to me.
And so what do you think will be the lessons learned for the future? Where do you think America's response will improve? And do you think that this will sort of restore sort of American faith in the ability of the government to do good things?
No, because in the places that have done it well, they're going to have low case rates, and it's going to look like what was all the hubbub about, right? Like why did you keep us at home for over a month when it wasn't a big deal? It's a real conundrum, right? And in the places where things explode, maybe it'll be like, why didn't the government do more? But in places where social distancing and shutdowns really work, I think there will be pushback from the other side, and a lot of. There was an interesting article in the Washington Post this week about the correlation between people's belief in social distancing and their belief in the need for collective action on climate change. Like, a lot of it is just like, how do you do you believe in the power of collective action to solve problems that are collective problems? And it's a real philosophical divide in the U.S. and it colors how you see everything. So whichever point of view you're coming from, I'm not sure that this pandemic will actually open your eyes to see the other side, unfortunately.
And so you don't think that this will be the kibosh on the Trump administration? You think those who support Trump will still consider him great, regardless of the snafu that he's made with this?
Well, no, I think there may be some. I mean, he was elected by such a narrow margin. You don't have to change that many people's minds about whether he's a good president to defeat him in the fall. There are a lot of questions going on right now about how we're even going to run our elections. A lot of people are arguing that we should fund a whole system of allowing people to vote by mail. That's another thing where laws vary from state to state, right? So in like Oregon and Colorado, and I think a couple other states, that you now get mailed a ballot for every election. You don't have to apply to be an absentee voter. It's just the default is that you're going to mail in your ballot. And in some other states, they have what's you can vote absentee for no reason. You don't have to be sick or out of the country or whatever. Like you can just say, I want a mail-in ballot, and they'll send you one. And then there are other states where you actually have to have a reason, like that fits into certain categories to be able to not vote in person. And there have been some minor elections over the last few weeks that have gone to the courts over like, can we force people to go vote in person right now? And in Ohio, people like the court ruling was like, no, you have to still hold the election and people have to go do it in person. And that's like, I think we're going to be having that fight between now and our presidential election this November. Because a lot of people would like to see mail-in ballots, but Trump literally said the other day that increases voter turnout too much and he'll lose, and that's why he doesn't support it.
So coming away from that then, coming on to you and games and what you've got in the pipeline. So firstly, how has this affected what you've got coming out in the next sort of 6 to 8 months? And on that, what have you got? What can we expect from Elizabeth Hargrave for the rest of the year?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've seen some game releases get delayed. So the next thing that I have coming out is Mariposas, which was slated to be released at Gen Con. I think it is an open question whether Gen Con will happen. I think there's a good chance that the businesses will be opening back up between now and August, but people will still think that it's irresponsible to have gatherings as large as Gen Con in August. Unless there are major, major advances, at least in treatment. We won't have a vaccine yet. But that's fine. Like it could still go to retail in August, and I'm not clear on whether there are enough problems in the supply chain for that to be bumped. And I think it's just too soon to say. But I have seen other game releases get bumped. I don't know how much of that is supply chain and how much is just sort of strategy around like people aren't paying attention right now. So we'll see. But that sometime this year, Mariposa should come out. And then sometime after that, well behind that in terms of production, like it hasn't gone to press yet, is the next expansion for Wingspan. So I've been working on Oceania, Australia, and New Zealand, and Papua New Guinea, and sort of that region of the world. So a new set of birds for that area. But like I said, that's like in blind play testing. I'm sort of making the final tweaks. The artists are pretty far along on all the art, and there's a good chance it'll be out by the end of the year, but not much before the end of the year, I don't think. So I don't know. Hope I'm not saying too much on the stone by her schedule. I actually don't really know. But that's my sense of sort of the timing of it.
And I spoke to Matt Leacock recently, and I asked him, sort of, do you expect to stop working on Pandemic anytime soon? And he was like, no, if people still want it, I'm happy to still work on it. Do you think that Wingspan will be something that you're working on for a long time into the future? Or will there come a point where you just say, no, I think we're done?
I mean, for now, what we've said is we want to do one expansion for each continent, because that's sort of a manageable chunk. And I do want to represent birds from different parts of the world. The birds that are in those expansions will be a tiny fraction of the total bird population of the world. So there is certainly room to go beyond that. And people keep saying we want to see extinct birds, and there's all kinds of directions that it could go if I still felt like I had something in me to do it. I don't know. With each one, I'm like, oh God, I'm out of ideas. And then I start researching all the birds, and I start thinking of things for them to do. And I have sort of mapped out for each continent some ideas about new stuff to bring in. So I'm confident that we can do at least that much. And then it's an open question after that.
Brilliant. Well, Elizabeth Hargrave, thank you for your time, and enjoy. It seems to me that your bird watching hasn't been interfered with, at least in this crisis.
Not at all.
If you want to support content like this, you can go to patreon.com/5G4D. Thank you for listening. Stay safe, and if you can, stay at home.